Hello, everyone. I hope you are having a wonderful day. I am sending a reminder really quick to a couple of people, but I am so happy that you guys are with me this evening, and I look forward to our discussion today. We're going to be talking about the fear of failure, learning resilience in the face of overwhelming failure. Remember, the failure does not have to do necessarily with something that you have done. It's something that puts you behind or missing the mark just because if somebody else did something wrong or a health issue or any of those kinds of things. So it's not just failure that a lot of the ways that people think about it. Anyway, so stumbled through that, but anyhow, I'm very happy to see you. I'm excited about getting onto this topic. Okay, who's with me? This is great. Hello, it's great to see you. Great to see you. Hi, Linda. How are you? Hi, Marcia. Hello, hello. How's everybody doing? Do you have your drinks with you? I'm excited that we're going to be talking about fear of failure, learning resilience in the face of overwhelming failure. I'm remembering that failure is not just something that you did, like a character failure or anything like that, but it has a lot to do with just anything that gets in the way of you hitting your mark, reaching your goals, or being able to live your life in the way that you should. So, yeah. Very happy to see you guys. Oh, great, Linda. Okay. That'll be nice. My iPad is so old that it does not receive updates any longer, and so it's tricky to use, but I would like to have a new one. That's very good that you have one. Good stuff. Good stuff. You guys have your drinks? Kind of excited. When I was, getting my mind set back for this evening's discussion, just glancing over things, I realized the crossover into another book. And if we have the chance, well, let me show you this book here. First, this is the book that's kind of basing our discussion last week and this week. We may or may not continue in it, but I noticed that there was some overlap in thought with this particular book. Now, some of you may know that I am a divorced empty nester, but these things are important to know in relationships that are close-knit. Anyway, so yeah, the Gottmans, Mr. Dr. and Mrs. I don't remember if Mrs. is a doctor also, but yeah, they have some excellent, groundbreaking, may I say, ways to handle things, including the 4 horsemen. So that's the crossover event, and hopefully we'll be able to get to that. But yeah. All right, so to get a running start, some of our past podcast live streams, we've talked about cognitive dissonance, where beliefs that you have are adjusted to match your behavior, or your behavior is adapted to your beliefs, or the dissonance that's between those two and what happens, or if you have 2 conflicting beliefs that are going on at the same time. Then we talked about scarcity mindsets. I have not had the opportunity to edit that video and get it back up available for everyone yet, but that is a very powerful and divisive destroyer, like I had titled it in the first place. Then we talked last week about failing forward and how it's your greatest opportunity to inspire and lift others up. So that's really good. As usual, I've got my peppermint tea, my hot peppermint tea. So hope you guys have something that you love as a drink. I still snicker. I know I told you guys this a couple of weeks ago, maybe last week, that my mom used to tell everybody that I made the best peppermint tea in the world. Don't know why. It's just a tea bag and hot water, but okay. All right. Well, shall we go ahead and get started? Are you guys ready? Because I do have a couple of chat questions, but then I also have something that I wanted you to write down, and then we're going to think about it again at the end, kind of like we did last week, where if you have that pen and paper handy now, it'd be very helpful for you to think of a recent failure that you would, if you were to recount it to somebody, you wouldn't consider it your fault. So it needs to be recent, unlike last week, where it needed to be pretty painful or, deep, something like that, so that you can move forward in how to handle those things in the future. So this time, if you would please, think about a very recent failure that you wouldn't tell, like if you were recounting a story, you wouldn't necessarily consider it your fault. Okay. All right. So getting back to this lovely book, I would swear that John Maxwell had plagiarized my thoughts that are in my book, except for he wrote this 25 years ago. It was written in 2000, so he probably wrote it, in 1999. And had it, anyway, you know what I'm saying. So we are talking about, obviously, failing forward. And the things that we have done in this book so far are, what's the main difference between people who achieve and people who are average? And we talked about Mary Kay Ash and her cosmetics company and how difficult that was with all of the cultural expectations that were put on women, especially in the 50s and early 60s, and how she had to fight just so hard against those things. Then we needed to talk about defining failure and success. If you get a new definition of failure, then you can recognize that not something to hide from, but something to use as you push forward in life and you continue to make progress despite or because of failure. Failure is very important to accomplish, actually. And we'll get to more of that in a little bit. But then the third principle is, just because you have failed does not make you a failure. You need to remove the you from your failure. And this particular point that we're working on, the chapter is called "You're Too Old to Cry, but It Hurts Too Much to Laugh." And that continues to make me laugh. Because if you can't laugh at yourself, what are you doing? Oh, hey, John, you're here. Yay. Oh, my goodness. Marsha, I'm so sorry. You've been working so hard on that at work. Access. Those are hindrances. So we can talk about that. That's a very good one. That's a very good one. And I know that you will appreciate the way that we will apply that in a little bit, because you have the right attitude when it comes to things like this. So, all right. Let's get started. You may remember that the most recent story we were talking about was Dr. Samuel Langley and how he tried very hard and very loudly. He brought the news anchors and everybody in to watch him try to get manned flight. He was a professor of mathematics and astronomy and the director of the Smithsonian Institution. He was an accomplished thinker, scientist, and inventor, all of that. So he and this was before 1900. So in 1898, he approached the U.S. War Department for funding, and they gave him a commission of $50,000. So it drew all sorts of attention. Then he enlisted the aid of Charles Manley, the engineer who built the powerful new lightweight engine, which was supposed to work. He ended up being the pilot in these attempts while everybody was watching and the news reporters were there and everything. So on October 8th, 1903, Dr. Langley, expected his years of work to come to fruition. And as the journalists and curious onlookers watched, Charles Manley, like I said, was wearing a cork-lined jacket, strode across the deck, and then proceeded to land in 16 feet of water, a mere 50 yards away from the boat where he was taking off from. So that was the first time. Then the second time, he thought, okay, Dr. Langley was, I'll get this. He's using his failure to go forward, so he's failing forward at this point. And basically the same thing happened again. But Charles Manley almost died. And both of those attempts brought such intense ridicule for Dr. Langley that he said, I have brought to a close the portion of the work which seemed to be specially mine, the demonstration of the practicality of mechanical flight. For the next stage, which is the commercial and practical development of the idea, it is probable that the world may look to others. Well, everybody knows who those others are because it was the Wright brothers. And instead of the Wright brothers, this is where the information becomes newer to us. We hadn't talked about this last week. But author J.I. Packer states, a moment of conscious triumph makes one feel after this, nothing will really matter. Okay, so if you're comparing the Wright brothers to Dr. Langley had a couple of failures that were very open, very criticized. It was harsh, very harsh experiences. And I completely understand why he decided to not move forward and probably just, use his influence and his abilities for other things. But the Wright brothers, when they were successful, and they were unfunded, by the way, they continued to move forward. And just days later, it says, Orville and Wilbur Wright, uneducated, unknown, and unfunded. Just days after Langley had given up, they flew their plane, Flyer 1, over the sand dunes of Kitty Hawk, North Carolina. And that's when author J.I. Packer states, a moment of conscious triumph makes one feel that after this, nothing will really matter. So he's saying, what will the Wright brothers do when they've had this major success right immediately on the heels of somebody else's tremendous failure? A moment of realized disaster makes one feel that this is the end of everything. But neither feeling is realistic, for neither event is really what it is felt to be. So the Wright brothers did not rest on their success. The rush of the achievement of that day in December of 1903 did not make them think that they had arrived. They continued experimenting and working, and eventually the public acknowledged their achievements. But they were not doing this all publicly, right? And I think that was a big positive for their workflow and their ability to continue moving forward. In contrast, Dr. Langley let his moment of disaster, or two moments of disaster, make him think it was the end. It's sad, but at the same time, like I said, I think he probably went on to other things that he was very well qualified for and worked hard on those. But the book here takes kind of a hard twist and is a little bit harsh on him setting aside everything. But anyway, So this is what we're talking about here. When we're talking today about learning resilience in the face of overwhelming failure, Dr. Langley possibly could have maybe gone forward. I wonder how much resilience he had gotten from this experience. But that's what we're talking about today, trying to find ways to be resilient to failure so that we can move forward. And remember, the entire reason why we talk about these things is so that we can inspire others that are around us with the influence that we naturally have and turn the world into a more positive place, little by little, conversation by conversation. So that's why all of this matters and why we need to consider learning resilience in the face of inevitable failure, right? Okay, so failure can be very painful, sometimes physically and more often emotionally. I'll say it again. Remember, failure is just something that devastates your progress toward your goal or progress toward what you should do. Something that makes you miss your mark is the cause of failure. Let's remember that definition. But seeing part of your vision fall flat really hurts. And if people heap ridicule on top of your hurt feelings, you feel even worse. So you're not even validated sometimes, just like Dr. Langley. That would be devastating to me. Yeah. So anyway, the first important step in weathering failure is learning not to personalize it. Remember, the previous chapter was talking about take the you out of the failure. The failure is separate from you. You are not the failure unless you decide you are the failure. And it was even taken a step further that failure is not objective, it's subjective. It's failure if you decide that it's failure. So one of the things that we're talking about today is for many people, the pain of failure leads to the fear of failure. There is a section here where Dr. Maxwell starts talking about the fear cycle. Fear of failure is what it ends up being. But imagine for a moment something that you had been afraid of, or some failure, whatever, something that hurt you in the past and makes you cringe or recoil a little bit when you try to push forward in the future in the same way. Well, that fear can cause you to not act in the future, right? And from that inaction, you're not able to gain experience. And from the inexperience, you're enabled. You're not able to. Okay? The fear of rejection creates inaction. Because the person doesn't act, he doesn't gain personal experience in that situation, which is the key to learning and overcoming future obstacles. The lack of experience breeds an inability to handle similar situations and ultimately feeds and increases the fear. The longer the fear remains unchecked, the harder a person has to work to break the cycle. Now, this brought a thought to mind. One of the ways that societies, I agree with you, Linda. I don't know why Langley made his seminal efforts so public either. Probably because of the $50,000 that he was given. Yes, he did. Yeah. Linda, he did have museum responsibilities. So I'm not sure. I think I would have been kind of quiet about it too. But his life to that point, he'd been all about education and moving forward up the hierarchy in culture and his society. I wonder. But that's food for thought for sure. I mean, how do we want to apply Langley and the Wright brothers, those examples, to how we choose to live our lives? That's a thought. But back to this here, the lack of experiences breeds an inability to handle similar situations. The first thing that I think about with that, this is an interesting thought. Now, let me take a step back away from it and hold on to that as we go forward or back into this, where, okay, my ex-husband, Steve, he used to get bronchitis every single year. A very, very, very sick bronchitis. So when he got married to me, granted, we were still kind of young, so by the time we were mid-20s or something like that, we started getting flu shots every year. And all of a sudden, he didn't have bronchitis every year anymore. And I was talking to my dad, who's an internal medicine physician. I said, this is strange. Do you think that there's any correlation? Because it seems like there's causation it seems like there's causation. Is there correlation? And my dad would say, well, think of a runner who's out there trying to get the very best time that they possibly can in whatever distance race that they run. They may cross-train by swimming. So while swimming is not running, it's still going to improve their health and their ability to run and make them a more well-rounded athlete. So a flu shot, in his opinion, would ramp up the immune system to the point that it would also help stave off bronchitis. So, thinking about that, lack of experience in one area might breed an inability to handle similar situations. So if you leave a failure as a failure and you tuck it away and do not let anybody talk about it, if you want to just make sure that it stays behind, stays hidden, then I bet you the entire part of your life that fed into is going to cause problems. Marcia, you said fear of what others would think that I would let stop me for a time from putting up. Well, oh, yeah. Right. When you were redoing your house in that particular way with the wallpaper and everything, and people were trying to tell you don't do that. But then that one piece of wallpaper that you put up that one time ended up being like breaking the dam, and you went flying forward into so much more productivity, and it elevated so much of your life. I love that story still. That's wonderful. So if we, let's see, where was that? The lack of experience. So if you don't handle that obstacle, that failure, and you allow yourself to become more and more and more afraid of that, the longer the fear remains unchecked, the harder a person has to work to break the cycle. Now, that's what I was getting ready to talk about when I stopped to discuss the chat. The societies, everything is very complex situations. Maybe last week or the week before, I was using the situation of education, especially of children, and how the education system has to work for the largest amount of the population it possibly can. And outside of those standard deviations of the norm, the people that are outside of that, they have to adapt to be able to fit into the structure. That's just the way that it is. That's the way that it happens. But when sometimes there's an emotional component to a person becoming disabled. Now, please hear me clearly on this. This is the spirit of what I am saying. I am not slamming anybody, because I know very much people in my very close circles that are absolutely disabled by particular things. So that's not the issue. But I believe that let's talk about that idea and how it crosses over with this one. The lack of experience, breeding an inability to handle situations, and then the longer the fear remains unchecked, the harder the person has to work to break the cycle. Now, if a person is deemed disabled, then it's very easy to just sit back on your haunches and not want to push forward, because the need to pay bills has been alleviated. It's calmed way down. And you've all heard of people getting stuck in the system. So once you're in that, it's extremely difficult to get out of that. And it can be a place of fear of failing, or even fear of succeeding because you don't want anybody to see you. So you understand. Once you're stuck in that fear cycle, or you're stuck in a construct of some sort, whether any of the ones that I listed or not, it takes real and intentional work. So the inaction that results when people are stuck in the fear cycle takes on many forms. And Dr. Maxwell comes up with 3 of the most common ones that he has seen. The first one is paralysis. And I've seen this, unfortunately, work in many people's lives. For some people, the fear of failure brings about absolute paralysis. They stop trying to do anything that might lead to failure. President Truman offered this opinion: the worst danger we face is the danger of being paralyzed by doubts and fears. This danger is brought on by those who abandon faith and sneer at hope. So President Truman, Harry S. Truman, was saying that the opposite of failure, or fear, is faith and hope. Okay. Faith and hope in yourself, in the system, in your life, in your ability to move forward. It is brought on by those who spread cynicism and distrust and try to blind us to the great chance to do good for all mankind. There's a story coming up that I'm going to share with you guys that is amazing, that talks about this. People who spread cynicism and distrust. We're going to talk about monkeys. How monkeys do this to each other. And try to blind us. Cynicism and distrust try to blind us to the great chance to do good for all mankind. Now, that's exactly what we try to work against here on this podcast. With our influence, we want to be influential. We want to empower others. We want to encourage others to become everything that they have been built to be in the sphere that they should be in, the role that they are meant to play and to fill in our society. We need everybody to do that. And so by being the inspirational influencers, we're able to help others fill that gap that only they can fill. All right. The second one is procrastination. Someone once called procrastination the fertilizer that makes difficulties grow. Do you remember them talking about fertilizer before? Let's see if I can find that really super quick. There was a coach that talked about that. Let's see. Oh, Linda, fear of trying for a promotion or another type of job due to a failure can keep us in a position we don't want or we don't enjoy or value. That's very true. Yeah. If I keep stepping out, then I don't have the time to work on a new job. The fear of, oh my gosh, I don't think I can handle all that at the same time as I can handle this. So, yeah. But, I am not finding it very quickly. But that one coach that talked about failure is the fertilizer. And it's great. It's a good thing. So he encourages everybody to, reach out there, just like I was talking about Ms. Frizzle from the Magic School Bus last week, where she says, take chances, get messy, make mistakes. It's good. Okay, so procrastination here is the opposite of that. And it's the fertilizer that makes difficulties grow. So the more you procrastinate, if you want to procrastinate on doing your dishes, if you let them sit there even overnight, over one night, 12 hours later, they take at least twice as long to clean because things have crusted over and all that, right? So procrastination, bad things. John F. Kennedy said, procrastination steals a person's time, productivity, and potential. There are risks and costs to a program of action, but they are far less than the long-range risks and costs of comfortable inaction. So procrastination is too high a price to pay for fear of failure. And the third thing that Dr. Maxwell says is purposelessness. This is just, I hate seeing this. I hate seeing this in people when they just completely give up because they're scared to death of failing. Tom Peters, who is the co-author of In Search of Excellence, emphasizes that there's nothing more useless than someone who comes to the end of the day and congratulates himself in saying, well, I made it through the day without screwing up. Yet that's what many people who fear failure do. Rather than pursue worthy objectives, they avoid the pain of making mistakes. And in the midst of that transition, they lose sight of any sense of purpose that they might have once possessed. Again, going back to what's very important, we need to know who we are and what it is that we are put on this world for, and use our influence in inspirational ways to encourage others in that very same way. So in that purposelessness, it could be self-pity, where a person feels sorry for themselves. And as time goes on, he takes less responsibility for his inactivity and starts thinking of himself as a victim. This kind of ties into those particular disabled situations that I was talking about before, where a person resolves, this is where I belong. I'm never going to be able to make it forward, so I'm just going to stay right here. Another way that there's purposelessness, excuses. A person can fall down many times, but he won't be a failure until he says that somebody pushed him. Looking outside of yourself to blame someone. Then there's misused energy. Constant fear divides the mind and causes a person to lose focus. I've been talking to a couple of different people about the idea of apathy. People who just decide that, I'm okay. And they don't want to propel forward at all. Not even minute step by minute step. They don't want to go forward for whatever reason. And one situation that I had talked to somebody about regarding apathy was internal. For whatever reason, they cannot possibly get a spark going. A spark. Like, why would I even bother? It's not necessarily fear of failure, but this is a thought. And then there's the excuses where something outside of that person, but I can't do that. I'm going to remain purposelessness with purposelessness because they did something. Looking outside. Perhaps it's true. Perhaps there's such great pressure in a person's life that they have become apathetic because they have resolved that the pressure outside of them from external influences is just too great for them to break out of. And then the misused energy, that is about the anxiety and all of that. So that's not necessarily, that's like an overwhelming, I think we've talked about this. If we didn't talk about that, it's absolutely in my book. where people are constantly scanning the horizon for things that are going to jump out at them, things that they have heard are bad things, things that they have seen in other people's lives that have harmed them. So this person is going to protect themselves by constantly spanning the horizon, i.e., anxious, right? They are very anxious, spanning the horizon for whatever boogeyman is going to jump out and do to them the same devastation that happened to their loved person, that or whoever it was that they knew they watched something bad happen to. So this is misused energy, and that can make a person purposelessness have it. Then there's hopelessness. If allowed to run their course, continual fear and inaction rob a person of hope. What a horrible thought when you don't have hope for the future. Poet Henry Wadsworth Longfellow described the situation in this way. The setting of a great hope is like the setting of the sun. The brightness of our life is gone. This is why it is imperative that we use our influence to inspire others. We need to continue encouraging and getting people to realize their value. Give them reasons to want to give them the dopamine rush by saying, oh my gosh, you look fantastic today. I'm so proud of you for this. I'm going to tell your mom that you did such a great job on whatever that was. Use them as an example in another person's, in a conversation with another person, but make sure that that person knows that they matter. This is incredibly important. When I'm with clients who seem to have resolved into this purposelessness, whether it's self-pity, excuses, anxiety, or anxiety run amok, which ends up with hopelessness, it's very hard to get a person out of that. And this may sound crazy, but one of the best ways that I can help a person move forward out of this situation is by trying to spark some kind of anger, by pushing just a little bit further than I normally would in a conversation to get them irritated. Why? Because all of a sudden there's a little tiny pilot light that came back on inside of them. And that is an excellent time for me to challenge them. There you are. What are you going to do with that passion that just came up? How are you going to move forward in this? How are you going to hold on to that flame and fan it into a full fireplace full of just blazing fire that's crackling and bringing other people hope and warmth and comfort? Sometimes that's what's needed. It's a difficult conversation to have with people. I don't like pushing people into corners or causing them to get irritated, but sometimes that's necessary. And I wonder if you would consider that approach possibly when you find a person that you've come across that is hopeless. Let's see what we can do. But use wisdom, of course. Wisdom and love. Okay, so talking about breaking this cycle that the fear of failure cycle, where the three most common results are paralysis, procrastination, or purposelessness. All right, how are we going to break that cycle? People who want to get out of the fear cycle often spend time feeling guilty for their inability to change. Oh my gosh. It's just like trying to hide failure. Okay, I keep doing this because I know that people don't look at this. This is a bad part. I don't want you to see where I have failed before. This is not good. I don't want you to know that I am not perfect. Same thing. Okay, so here they feel guilty because they can't seem to move forward for their inability to change. The longer you hide things behind and you don't let people help or you don't talk about it and you start feeling guilty, then it ends up festering and causing massive problems, making it so much harder to get through. Just like John Maxwell was saying, the longer the fear remains unchecked, the harder a person has to work to break the cycle. So let's not let ourselves or anyone that we care about around us get in that. Okay, we need to help before it gets, the ditch gets dug so deep they can't climb out. But one of the reasons that they're stuck in that cycle is that they focus their energy on the wrong part of the cycle. Since they know that fear got the cycle going, they believe they have to eliminate the fear. Think about that just for a second. You don't have to eliminate the fear. Yet most people are unable to eliminate the fear, right? You can't avoid fear. No magic potion will take it away. And you can't wait for motivation to get you going. To conquer fear, this is important. You have to feel the fear and take action anyway. Joyce Meyer has a book that she has written. She's a wonderful teacher. She's got such great wisdom, and she came from an absolutely horrific background. Perhaps you want to look her up and listen to her own personal story, but she wrote a book among dozens that she's written that's called Do It Afraid. I had a conversation with my granddaughter who spent the night last night. Yesterday, I wanted her to help me with something, getting some of the Christmas things from the basement, because this has been and that's why you see the Christmas tree over there. This has been my week of fall break. While I'm doing my doctorate in social psychology, there was a week, and I knew the next time I had any kind of a break that I would be able to actually pull all of the Christmas stuff out isn't until almost Christmas, and that's just not going to work for somebody like me. Anyway, beautiful little Naya, she's 6 years old, so she was able to help me in a particular way that actually made her scared, but I proved to her that she was safe and she still felt that fear. And I said, I just need your little skinny tiny arm to reach around this box and help me pull this box forward, because I cannot do it on my own. And when your mommy and Baba come, you can tell them this incredible thing that you did. And that anytime somebody tells you that you are able to do hard things, I want you to be able to look at this and say, I did that. I did it. I did it. I did it. Doing it afraid proves to yourself that you are able to handle hard things and you can move forward, even with fear completely intact. Beautiful little Naya, she helped me with this, and she had a tear that was on her cheek coming down. But she's like, I've got strength like Baba. I can do this. And by the way, she, of course, calls her daddy Baba. I can do this, and I'm going to tell him when he comes, I've got strength like Baba. And you should have seen that little girl beam with pride, ear to ear, teeth. It was wonderful to see. These are the kinds of ways that we need to be empowering the people around us to give them inspiration with our influence, bringing others up as much as we possibly can. Okay. Several years ago, this is Dr. Maxwell again. Several years ago, while he was sitting in his doctor's waiting room, he came across a few paragraphs in a medical magazine that describes the battle to act, like pushing forward to do it on purpose. We hear it almost every day. Sigh, sigh, sigh. I just can't get myself motivated to blah, lose weight, test my blood sugar, do what's right, all of that. Oh, great, Linda. This is an amazing book. I think you'll enjoy it. But we have news for you. This is the article continuing on in the medical magazine. Motivation is not going to strike you like lightning. And motivation is not something that someone else, i.e. the nurse, doctor, family member, can bestow or force on you. The whole idea of motivation is a trap. Forget motivation, just do it. We've heard about that a lot from the Nike commercials from years ago. exercise, lose weight, and test your blood sugar, whatever. Do it without motivation. And then guess what? After you start doing the thing, then is when the motivation comes and makes it easy for you to keep on doing it. Now, this is not 100% true because I was just preaching about how important it is for us to inspire others that are around us to help keep their fire stoked and keep them moving forward and give them the hope to go forward. Give them the dopamine rush, whatever, the pat on the back, whatever it is that they need to recognize that they are valued and they are important. But at the same time, we can't always look outside of ourselves for the motivation. You have to just do it, whether we're afraid or not. Just do it. And the more momentum that you get becomes the more motivation you have. You keep going and going and going and going, and there's more and more and more. So motivation is like love and happiness. It's a byproduct. When you're actively engaged in doing something, it sneaks up and zaps you when you least expect it. As Harvard psychologist Jerome Bruner says, you're more likely to act yourself into feeling than feel yourself into action. That's a good one. That's cognitive behavioral therapy. If you don't feel like it, then you can act it until you feel it, and then the action comes from within. So that's a very good thing. And of course, people say, fake it till you make it. Same thing. That all fits kind of in here, right? All right, get moving, build momentum, make mistakes, and move on. Playwright George Bernard Shaw asserted, a life spent in making mistakes is not only more honorable and more useful than a life spent doing nothing. To overcome fear and break the cycle, you have to be willing to recognize that you will spend much of your life making mistakes. Make mistakes. Make mistakes. What is it that you can possibly make mistakes about today? It's getting a little bit late. But what can you make a mistake on? That's going to take courage to move forward, because almost inevitably you're going to fail at it. But you're going to make, like, you know how it's 3 steps forward, 2 steps back, but you still made that 1 step forward. What is it that you are going to fail at in the next 24 hours? What mistake are you going to make? The bad news is that if you've been inactive for a long time, getting started is hard to do. The good news is that as soon as you get moving, it gets easier. An object in motion stays in motion, right? All right. President Theodore Roosevelt said, he who makes no mistakes makes no progress. Very important to know this. Many unsuccessful people get stuck in the fear cycle. Let's go back over that fear cycle, what that means. Something happens and you get afraid. Motivates you to not act. That builds inexperience, and the inexperience keeps you unable, disabled, right? And then the fear comes back in, and it gets worse and worse and worse and worse. And the longer the fear remains unchecked, the harder a person has to work to break the cycle. So, what is it that is your most recent failure that we, at the very beginning we were talking about? And how would you handle that knowing this information? This is just for a thought. We're going to move forward in just a second. Just a second, in a couple minutes. And we will get to more about that. But just keep checking in with what it was you were thinking about before. We need to read a story here. One moment. Okay. I'm going to end up telling 2 stories. Okay. So this is important. Make sure you got your listening ears on, like the kindergarten teachers say. Many unsuccessful people get stuck in the fear cycle. But the same thing happens to high achievers. I'm going to tell you about a high achiever. Read through this story, and I think you're going to be very grateful that this high achiever allowed outside influence to spark that flame back inside of him, because even I forget what year this was, but I'll dare say hundreds of years later, we are affected by this. I won't even tell you his name. Dawn, here's hoping that I don't mess it up and say his name accidentally while I'm telling the story. Okay, so when you look at the life of the composer, blank, you see a successful person who found himself in a rut that he needed desperately to break out of. He was a musical prodigy. Though his father wanted him to study law, he gravitated to music at an early age. By age 17, he held the post of church organist at the cathedral in Halle, his hometown. A year later, he became a violinist and a harpsichordist at the Kaiser's Opera House in Hamburg. By 21, he was a keyboard virtuoso. This person was built for this, right? When he turned to composing, he gained immediate fame and soon was appointed as the major conductor to the Elector of Hanover. Not exactly sure some of those terms because I'm not German. But when this person moved to England, his renown grew. By the time he was 40, he was world famous. Despite his talent and fame, he faced considerable adversity. Competition with the rival English composers, all of them. It was fierce. Audiences were fickle and sometimes didn't turn out for his performances. And he was frequently the victim of changing political winds of the times. Several times he found himself penniless and on the verge of bankruptcy. When this man lived, that's frightening. The pain of rejection and failure was difficult to bear, especially following his previous success. Then his problems were compounded by failing health. He suffered a seizure or stroke, which left his right arm limp and caused him to lose use of 4 of the fingers of his right hand. Although he recovered, he remained despondent. And that's exactly what we were talking about before. In 1741, so yes, a couple hundred years ago, he decided that it was time to retire, even though he was only 56. He was discouraged, miserable, and consumed with debt. He felt certain he would land in debtor's prison. That's why I said, especially when he lived, that's terrifying, to be penniless and near bankruptcy. On April 8th, he gave what he considered his farewell concert. Disappointed and filled with self-pity, he gave up. But in August of that year, from April to August, so 4 months, an incredible thing happened. A wealthy friend named Charles Jennings, visited this guy and gave him a libretto based on a life of Christ. The work intrigued Handel. I said it. Dang it, Dawn. I did it. The work intrigued this composer enough to stir him to action. He began writing, and he immediately, the floodgates of inspiration opened in him. His cycle of inactivity was broken. For 21 days, he was almost writing nonstop. Then he spent another 2 days creating the orchestrations. In 2 days, okay, picture an orchestra. 2 days, he wrote the orchestrations. So in 24 days, 3.5 weeks, he had completed the 260-page manuscript that he called the Messiah. Handel's Messiah is considered a masterpiece and the culmination of the composer's work. So took a lot of what he had done before, brought it to the Messiah. Can you imagine if Handel had just been left despondent and hadn't had this friend? I will tell you his name because I want us all to be Charles Jennings to other people, bring inspiration to others, and help them move forward. When it comes to getting over the emotional hurts of failure, it really doesn't matter how good or how bad your personal history is. The only thing that matters is that you face your fear and get moving. Do that, and you give yourself the opportunity to learn how to fail forward. Now, this is the story about the monkeys that I wanted to say. We're running out of time, so I'm going to be quick about this story, and then we're going to have to continue on. I apparently have enough material to handle 2.5 or 3 live streams. My apologies. Like many sermons out there, they have too many points to fit in the time. But anyway, this is not a sermon, just making a point. Okay, listen to this. This is why we need to make sure to use our influence to inspire and not to inhibit. Especially not to prohibit. No. We want to inspire. But listen to the monkeys. 4 monkeys were placed in a room that had a tall pole in the center. Suspended from the top of that pole was a bunch of bananas. One of the hungry monkeys started climbing the pole to get something to eat. But just as he reached out to grab a banana, he was doused with a torrent of cold water. Squealing, he scampered down the pole and abandoned his attempt to feed himself. Each monkey made a similar attempt, and each one was drenched with cold water. After making several attempts, they finally gave up. Then researchers removed one of the monkeys from the room and replaced him with a new monkey. As the newcomer began to climb the pole, the other 3 grabbed him and pulled him down to the ground. After trying to climb the pole several times and being dragged down by the others, he finally gave up and never attempted to climb the pole again. The researchers replaced the original monkeys one by one, and each time a new monkey was brought in, he would be dragged down by the others before he could reach the bananas. In time, the room was filled with monkeys who had never received a cold shower. They hadn't been burned themselves. Remember me talking about those people who have a great deal of anxiety because the people that they have witnessed being harmed greatly, that person is constantly scanning the horizon for what could happen to them, not because something has happened in their own lives, but because they've at least heard about it from somebody else. They were taught to be afraid, taught to be inhibited, possibly prohibited, right? In time, the room was filled with monkeys who had never received a cold shower. They hadn't felt the pain of failure themselves, but none of them would climb the pole, and not one of them knew why. The old saying is true. If you always do what you've always done, then you'll always get what you've always gotten. Sometimes, if you feel like you can't seem to achieve what you desire and you don't know why, take a look at the pattern that many failure-prone people fall into. And that's what I need to leave for next time. But better the devil you know than the one you don't. That's another paralyzing thing, right? Well, here we are at the end of everything, and I'm sorry I didn't get to finish quite far enough, but I want to remind everybody that you're very welcome to go to my website, CoachAmyPratt.com, and find the list of the live streams that every single week there's the new one that's sitting there and the list of the old ones that have happened in the past. Also, there are curriculum listed there that I'm able to help you through, or I can take to your business if you would like to have any kind of lunch and learns or seminars on any one particular subject. I can do all-day seminars, or I can do the lunch and learns, which I believe I have some curricula that are either 5 weeks or 6 weeks, and we can delve into whichever situation you would like to, whatever you find that would be helpful for your team or for your own self, or for your relationship with your spouse, all of those things. Next week, I'm very excited because I have a co-host. I'm very happy about it. She is the CPA, and I did not pull that up. That is just terrible. I will pull that really quick. Natalie French. Yes, she is a CPA by training, and she has kept up with her certifications and everything, all the what she needs to be that CPA, a constantly practicing CPA. But she considers herself a financial coach. So next week, excuse me just one second while I find her wording, and I'm so sorry that I did not have that up and going already, but here we go. Let's see. I'll get there. Give me a second. Be patient with me. This is a wonderful thing about I can always slice and dice this video later on, so I don't have to worry about things like this. Later on, I can handle that. Okay, so next week, we're going to be talking about the pros and cons of debt-free living and how that changes our influence to become inspirational. She had let me know. Right? I'm getting to it. That's okay. But anyway, Natalie French is going to be joining me next week. And I'm very excited because she's going to be actually sitting next to me. Sometime in the future, I have another co-host that's going to be joining me from afar. And so we're going to have to use Google Meet and do a live stream through Google Meet. I'm excited about that. But, okay. Does anybody have anything to say? Thank you so much for joining me today. I really greatly appreciate all of you. And I love it that you're here, that you are doing everything you possibly can to change your influence, not just to blah or pulling people back, like in that monkey story, but you are trying your best to hone your influence to something that is inspirational to others, so that conversation by conversation, bit by bit, we can change the world for the better and improve the lives of other people around us. Thank you so very much. I hope you have a wonderful night. And please remember to try to find some way to fail forward in the next 24 hours. Some way that matters. Just do it. Thank you. I'll see you next Sunday.